We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land, but we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, your neighbor over there, a bit bewildered, but he cares. He just doesn't know what to do. Join together and then there'll be two. There are others all around, scattered throughout the town. Reach out and you will see your numbers swell to 3. We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land, but we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Now together.
President Reagan, one of his top priorities was to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, which was doing land reform, getting medical care for the population, schools, education, and Witness for Peace, and supporting the Contras to try to overthrow this government. Well, Witness for Peace was making it hard for them, all these people coming back home and sharing their stories. So we started something called the Pledge of Resistance, where thousands of people in the religious community and others signed a pledge saying if the United States took further steps of aggression against the people of Nicaragua or El Salvador or Guatemala, we would do active nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience at military bases, at congressional offices, etc. And so we had thousands of people that signed that pledge and did nonviolent action on an ongoing basis to try to stop that. And one of the Reagan administration officials was quoted as saying, if it weren't for these Christians, we could have overthrown the Sandinista government a long time ago. And the other thing that was happening was the sanctuary movement, where churches here were taking in refugees who were fleeing the wars in Central America. And those folks were sharing the story personally of what they had experienced. So again, bringing the truth to the American people about what our government is doing in another part of the world. You know, all during the 80s, the, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 50s, what was being said was, you know, you can use nonviolence against a humane government like Gandhi did against India, against Britain, but it would never work against communists, you know, dictators, you know, godless, you know, don't care about it. I mean, they couldn't care less if 1 million people were killed. Well, what was interesting was that in 1989, and this was, you know, starting with the Solidarity movement in Poland, people overcame their fear and began organizing and built a powerful nonviolent movement, even when there was terrible repression, which overcame that communist government, and they moved from dictatorship to democracy. Well, in East Germany, where I had lived, and saw this nuclear Armageddon, you know, threatening each other across the Berlin Wall, the churches began training local people in nonviolence 10 years before that. And then when the people on both sides finally tore that wall down, the military had been ordered, the East German military had been ordered to shoot to kill anybody that messed with that wall. And in tearing down that wall, it's a much bigger story than this, but not one person was hurt or injured, and not one of the ordinary people hurt or injured any of the police or the military who had the guns. And what an East German pastor said to me this last summer was the East German government was prepared for every eventuality except candles, except nonviolence. And when I went back to Checkpoint Charlie, where the Soviet and American tanks had been facing each other, here was a great big billboard with a photo of Walesa, the head of the Solidarity Movement, and Gandhi, and with a museum, pointing to a museum halfway up the street, from Gandhi to Walesa on the history of nonviolent struggle. And I thought, well, what a wonderful transformation from tanks threatening each other with nuclear war to a history of nonviolent struggle. And all of Eastern Europe overthrew the communist dictatorships without firing a weapon, without a person being killed by the movement. And in all those cases, there were orders from the police and from the government to shoot. But when faced with unarmed people, they refused their orders. So, and that's except for Romania, where there was an armed revolt. But I think it's quite, and that's been happening all around the world, is people who are faced with governments that are not listening to the people, that are allied with a small clique of rich or powerful folks. People are discovering the power of nonviolent action, nonviolent resistance, and when they overcome their fear, are able to throw out the dictators, throw out the governments that won't listen to the people. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan have studied 323 violent and nonviolent movements over the last 110 years, and have found that the nonviolent movements were twice as likely to be successful as the violent movements, and more than twice as likely not to end up in dictatorship or revert to a civil war. So the people of the world are learning about the power of nonviolent action and nonviolent resistance. And I think that's a tremendous tool against governments that are not listening to the people, which include our own in the United States, as well as dictatorships in other parts of the world. Well, one of these people power movements that threw out their dictator was the people power movement in the Philippines, where they threw out Marcos, who everybody thought would be impossible to overthrow. But through the courageous leadership of people in the Catholic Church, including the cardinal and the priests and the nuns, they faced down the tanks and got rid of Marcos. But by '89, unfortunately, they hadn't gotten rid of the military that were still trying to learn stuff from the American war in Vietnam, and there was communist guerrillas in the island of Negros that were organizing among the sugar workers, who were desperately poor, and the Philippine Council of Churches invited the Northern California Ecumenical Council to send a delegation just to learn what was going on there, which I was invited to be a part of. And we went down to Negros and found that an area the size of Rhode Island was being bombed by the Philippine military, American guns and weapons and planes. And the people who survived had fled outside this area that was being bombed to church halls or wherever they could find. And we found that in Bacolod, the capital of Negros, there were 600 of these refugees who were crowded into one big social hall. People who, again, just took what they could on their backs, carrying their children and a little bit of food. And the death squads had come to this church hall threatening to kill everybody. And the people were just desperate. They had fled the wars, the bombing planes. So in the capital of Negros, there was a church hall, a social hall in which 600 people had been crammed in, refugees who had fled with what they could carry on their backs, their children. And the death squads came and threatened them all with being killed unless they left within 36 hours. Within 3 days, that's 72 hours. We went to visit, we heard about this, went to visit the Catholic bishop, Antonio Fortich, and he was in tears, saying, "Where can these people go? They've suffered so much." And we shared a little bit about the experience of Witness for Peace and Peace Brigades International in Central America. And his eyes lit up and he said, "That's what we'll do. We will invite international religious people to come and be present with these refugees." So he dictated a statement, and we flew off that morning to Manila, typed this up, faxed it to everybody we could think of. This is 1989. And within 2 days, we had 25 international religious people there in the church hall in Bacolod with these refugees, and said at a press conference to the death squads and anybody else that would listen, these people are our brothers and sisters. They're children of God. We are appealing to you, the death squads, not to carry through on your orders, but to treat these people as your brothers and sisters. And we want you to know that we're going to be here with them, and we're also going to tell the rest of the world what happens here. And perhaps needless to say, the death squads decided not to come. Often those kind of folks don't want to do stuff in broad daylight. And we then stayed there for a few days until we felt that the immediate threat was over. And now these folks have built peace communities where they're asking both sides, the guerrillas and the military, to honor their peace community, not to get involved in the wars, which has happened in Colombia and in other parts of the world as well. By 87, the wars in Central America were in full tilt. I mean, all through the 80s was pretty bad. But by 87, Veterans for Peace, veterans were going down, veterans of the Vietnam War. And Brian Wilson was one of my friends that had been in the war in Vietnam. One of his jobs was to go into war zones in the villages after the bombing. He was in the Air Force. And to ascertain how effective the bombing had been. And one village after another, he found, the people were all dead. And it was almost all women and children and old men, and no weapons. And in this one village in particular, a woman with her eyes wide open had been killed. The napalm had burned her eyelids, but her eyes were wide open, looking at him. And around her body were her children, clinging to their mom for comfort. They were also dead. And it was like a conversion experience for Brian. What in the world am I doing 10,000 miles from home? Killing, destroying people in these villages. Well, he eventually got discharged, and then in the 80s he went back. He went to Central America because he'd heard something similar was happening, and met these villagers who had lost their loved ones, and the medical clinics and so forth in their communities. And he came back and he says, "David, we have to do something much more powerful than what we've been doing to stop this." So Brian was a lawyer and had studied the Nuremberg trials, the Nuremberg principles, and realized that what we were doing in Central America were crimes against humanity. Killing innocent men, women, and children, who were no threat to us, was a crime against humanity. And that also doing nothing in the face of war crimes is a war crime. So doing nothing to stop it, we were also guilty. So we decided to start what we called Nuremberg Actions, in which we would literally block arms shipments from Concord Naval Weapons Station, which is just northeast of San Francisco, 35 miles or so. We would block trains and trucks carrying bombs and munitions out to ships, which would then go to Central America. And again, we did 8-hour nonviolent trainings, formed into affinity groups, and informed the base what we're planning to do. Brian decided that starting September 1st of '87, that he and other veterans would start a 40-day fast. And that he said, our lives are not more important than the people in Central America, and their lives are not less important than our lives. And he really believed that. It's a very radical idea, because I think a lot of Americans kind of think our lives are more important. It's all right if we drop bombs on them because we want their oil or we want their resources. Well, Brian didn't believe that. So I said to the Navy, you've got 3 choices. You can stop these arms shipments, or you can arrest us. But if you release us, the moment that we're released, we'll be back on the tracks, or you can run over us. And he and none of us ever would have dreamed that what they decided to do would be to run over us. And actually, earlier that summer, a number of us, including me, were arrested for blocking trucks carrying bombs and munitions. So we figured that's what would happen again. But on September 1st, instead of stopping the train and arresting us, they just smashed through us, ran over Brian, and cut off one of his legs. The other one was mangled so badly it had to be amputated. I was knocked down because I was looking at the spotters on the front of the train saying, "Stop the train, there are people on the tracks." And they just kept going faster and faster. So I was knocked down trying to stop the train. And when I looked under the locomotive and then the boxcars carrying the munitions, here was Brian being smashed from one side to the other. Looked like hamburger. And as soon as the train had passed, I ran toward where Brian's body, which had been dragged by the train for a ways. And I first came across one of his legs that had been amputated. And here his whole body was was covered with blood, a big hole in his head. And I immediately kind of put my hand over his head to try to stop the bleeding. His wife of 10 days, who was a trained midwife, used her scarf, I guess it was, to try to stop the bleeding from his severed leg. And the Navy police ambulance came, and I said, "Take this man to the hospital, he's dying." And they said, "We're not allowed to." And so it was another 25 minutes before the other ambulance came. None of us thought he was going to live. And everybody was in utter horror of what had happened. And I, as one of the people with Brian who'd organized this, felt a terrible responsibility. Well, when I went to visit him in the hospital a couple of days later, here was Brian totally covered with bandages and no legs, but I could see his eyes. And I said, "Brian, we've decided to have a rally out at the tracks at Concord on Saturday, and is there anything you'd like to share with them?" And he just kind of shared this beautiful love for the people of Central America. And they tried to stop us, but we're not going to stop. And we can continue to stop this madness. And I'll be back there with you as soon as I can. And which we had 9,000 people there several days later, and played the tape of Brian sharing this. Well, instead of stopping our Nuremberg actions, we had people there for 2.5 years blocking every train. Sometimes they would have to arrest 2 busloads of us to get us off the tracks before the train could go through. And we found out later that the government had orders had come from Washington for the train not to stop. And what they were saying was, "We have a war to fight, and we don't want you guys in the way." But instead of getting out of the way, as I say, our commitment to try to stop this insanity intensified. It was during these same years that the Pledge of Resistance was doing nonviolent actions all across the country, including at a number of military bases. So we would have hoped that what we were doing at Concord could have been replicated in many other military bases. But so it did inspire people in this country, but in Central America, I went back to El Salvador and Nicaragua a year and a couple of years later, and in villages where there was no electricity, no newspaper, people had heard about Brian Wilson and the people that had risked their lives to try to stop, these arms shipments. And were just so deeply touched that there were Americans that cared so much about their suffering and their pain and the death of their family members that we were willing to risk our lives to stop this insanity. So I think that's the kind of what's the word? Putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. That if Americans could do that better, we would not allow our government to do what it's doing. Not only to Central America in the 80s, but today in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria and Pakistan and God knows wherever else, where we have whatever is over 1,000 military bases in 145 countries or so around the world. And I think we're dropping bombs at the moment on 7 Muslim countries. Well, it doesn't take a real smart person to figure out, maybe that's why they hate us. Maybe that's what is recruiting more people into Al-Qaeda and ISIS, etc. Anyway, we need a radical shift in the way we're looking at the world. But when our country is doing stuff like bombing the people of Vietnam, bombing the people in Central America, bombing Iraq, Afghanistan, it is really a very supportive to be with other people that feel as deeply as you do the pain that we're inflicting on these folks, and are willing to actually do something to try to stop it. So those have been some of the strongest friends and communities of my life, are people that were part of these actions together. And Brian has written a book called Blood on the Tracks, which is his story of conversion from being born of parents, members of the John Birch Society and Christian Anti-Communist Crusade, to risking his life to try to stop the killing of people in other parts of the world. Brian is trying to live the revolution, not riding in planes or riding in cars using fuel. And so when he wrote his book, he bicycled from Portland, Oregon down to San Francisco, 700 miles on his bike, a hand-pedaled bicycle, to pedal his book. I joined him for the last 70 miles of that. And he gave book talks along the road. And as we were coming up the hill from Sausalito to the Golden Gate Bridge, Brian he'd bicycled 700 miles with arms that aren't meant to doing that. And he was really worried, am I going to get up this hill? And I was right behind him, and finally, as he got slower and slower, I got off my bike and pushed my bike with one hand, and the other gave him pushed his back to help get the last, couple hundred feet up the hill. But it's indicative of our relationship. I feel the pain the suffering that he's gone through the rest of his life. This will last almost 30 years now. And I feel responsibility. But I'm so deeply touched by how instead of making him into a person afraid of this all-powerful government, it's made him into a nonviolent world citizen, nonviolent revolutionary, committed to changing this whole structure that what Senator Fulbright during the Vietnam War called the arrogance of power. That America we're powerful and we think we have the right to rule the world and tell the world. Well, Brian is risking his life to try to change that and trying to live by the values that, as if we thought that people in all parts of the world mattered. After Diablo Canyon, the energies of many of us that had been involved there, this is in the early 80s, when Reagan was threatening nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And he said, we'll start bombing in 5 minutes. We can start bombing in 5 minutes. And out at Livermore Nuclear Weapons Labs, which is 30, 40 miles from San Francisco, the United States was designing these nuclear weapons and spending more than $1 billion a year to do this. And we just thought, the Bay Area is considered liberal, and and this is happening right in our backyard. Well, we decided to do what we had done down at Diablo Canyon, to actually build a nonviolent campaign to try to convert Livermore Labs from nuclear weapons production to doing something useful for the world. And so we started nonviolent protests out there. And as usual, they tried to instill fear in us. And in '83, I think it was, we had over 1,000 people that were arrested. There was not enough room in the jail, so 500 of the men were in a circus tent with barbed wire around it. And we spent 15 days in the circus tent. But rather than feeling sorry for ourselves, we used that time to build community, share our life stories. Dan Ellsberg was there and gave us a teach-in on nuclear weapons and the arms race. I led strategy games on nonviolent civilian-based defense as a better way of trying to defend your country. People did yoga and sharing whatever skills they had. And we came out much, much stronger than we did. And we've had an ongoing campaign for the last 30-some years to convert that facility that is doing something insane. And we have enough nuclear weapons in the world to kill everybody in the world many times over. And here we're trying to modernize our nuclear weapons stockpile. While our schools are going to pot, and our infrastructure is, bridges are falling. We don't have money for preschool programs, et cetera. But that's our nation's priorities. So that's an ongoing campaign, including people living right in Livermore who found out that there's radiation leaking into the ground, and so the playground was radioactive. So, and their water was radioactive. So this is part of a worldwide movement to try to bring our governments to some kind of sense, away from their insane direction that they're trying to take the world. Well, starting in '91, I started working with Peace Workers, a small non-government organization, which is our original goal was to try to, after our experience in Central America, was to help build larger scale nonviolent peace teams, like Peace Brigades International Witness of Peace, so the world could discover the power of nonviolent peace teams as a better way to intervene in oppressive situations or in conflict areas than in, with military intervention. So that led to my working with people in many parts of the world. I went back to Chiapas after, in 1994, did I say 91? It was 93 that we started our work with Peace Workers. In 94, the Zapatistas declared, independence from Mexico, and that was the day that what's it called? The trade treaty. What's it called? NAFTA. The day that NAFTA was to go into effect. They said, this is going to destroy us. So they started an uprising, and the Mexican military moved in with all their heavy-duty military equipment. And the bishop, the Catholic bishop in Chiapas, Samuel Ruiz, invited a bunch of us to come down to be an international accompaniment. So Peace Workers, together with Global Exchange and others, started what we called CIPAS, Servicio Internacional para la Paz, International Service for Peace, to accompany people in the villages who were being threatened by the armed troops coming in to try to stop this Zapatista uprising. And we've been there ever since. CIPAS has been there ever since.
We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all must